Welcome back to another episode of the Art of Coaching podcast. I am here with Dr. Nick Holton and Dr. Adam Wright. Gentlemen, thanks for joining me for this conversation.
Thanks for having us. Excited to be here.
Yeah, genuinely happy. I've known your work for a long time, right? I loved your book when it came out a long time ago. I read it. It's actually in the office. So
I
I've
appreciate that.
appreciated your stuff for a very long time. So I'm very happy to be here.
Well, let me ask the obvious question then as an on-ramp, right? These first 5 minutes are always key. Why the hell haven't we met in person? I didn't know this.
Yeah.
I didn't know this.
Yeah, conscious coaching, dude. I know it. Yeah, absolutely. And you know what struck me more than anything is I finally met a strength coach who's willing to be vulnerable and tell a real story about their life as opposed to some cultivated nonsense that sounds good, but we all know is not the real story behind the scenes.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. And you teed it up for me perfectly because I listen to a lot of your guys' episodes as well because I try to make sure that, we honor your subject matter expertise, but we also give you a way to talk about some things that maybe you don't always get to talk about. And we did both of your bios on the intro. So you're removed from that responsibility to go into all that. But I do want to know, I'd love to know a little vulnerability from you guys. I mean, you care a great deal about what both of you teach, educate, speak on. I'm not asking for you to give me some Oprah moment or expecting you to cry, but Dr. Holton, let's start with you and let me know how you like to be addressed, but just so we can manage kind of the logistics.
Nick's cool.
Okay, Nick,
Yeah.
what's the bigger why, the pain point, the thing that made you feel like, Jesus, I need to get up and I need to talk about this or that more than anything else? Why anti-fragility or any of the topics that you discuss? What was the thing that frustrated you or the key pain point?
So Adam and I shared, I think, passion is around human potential, right? Various types of science that can inform that. We come from different backgrounds and expertise, right? But I lead with that because for me, not to get too sentimental, but I've told this story before. That started, I can go all the way back to sixth grade, like 12 years old, helping my little sister in the driveway. I was a good soccer player. I could have been a collegiate soccer player. She was more performing arts, right? I tried to help her, hook her up a little bit. She went out and had a great game. And I remember as a 12-year-old, correlation is not causation, but I looked at that great game and said, oh, I did that.
Yeah.
Right. And I loved that feeling of like, she was happy and she was happy because I helped in some way. And so like fast forward, to keep this answer as short as possible, I went into education, right? That eventually led to disenchantment as opposed to inspiration in terms of human potential. And I ended up going back for my PhD. And when I went back for my PhD and I was asking deeper questions about human potential, it opened me up to the world of human flourishing and positive psychology and well-being and intrinsic motivation and flow states and all these amazing things. That was great, right? But more pointedly to your question and why we started talking more and more about anti-fragility is somewhere along the way, I think Adam and I felt like we were in a position to sometimes react to people who were suffering. We were also sometimes in a position to help people build well-being, but more and more we felt like there was a missing role, a missing ingredient, which was this sort of like proactive relationship with unpleasant experiences that still nourish, that still build and still grow, right? And the more we looked at the literature, the more we kind of nerded out together and talked about it, the more we said, this is actually very much in line with the idea of a thriving human existence or a good life. And then we started seeing it kind of, real classic case studies and examples out in the world. And probably the most poignant for us was, I believe it was March of 2022, when five collegiate athletes in that month alone committed suicide. Probably the most famous of which was the goalie for Stanford women's team, which is a prolific program and happens to be a sport in the sex that I spent a lot of time coaching, kind of in my younger years. So, kind of from all the way back to a little guy to now, that was kind of the evolution. And Adam and I said, we've got to get out in front of this, not wait and react, but try to find ways to message this more proactively.
Helpful to understand. And I appreciate you coloring that context. And there's a lot of things that we're going to dive into after I hear more about Adam's inciting incident, right? And all these things because this is something I'm very passionate about as well. And what drew me to your guys' work. We live in this age of optimization and engaging with almost the people don't want to lean into conflict as the engine that it is. Sometimes there's a lot of emphasis on the pleasant. And I think you guys have done a wonderful job talking about like, hey, there's value in understanding flourishing. There's value in understanding all these other aspects, but, and this isn't your language, right? But like, we also have to understand the value of dealing with the darkness and integrating, not avoiding these things, and
right.
how we manage that. So I appreciate that. Adam, your inciting incident, the thing that kind of made you really want to go down this path.
So if we want to be a little bit vulnerable, which is not usually my forte, so to speak. But like, make this clear: I'm a blue collar guy, right? I didn't get in this field simply by reading textbooks and chasing degrees. Right? And as I tell most of my clients, particularly in the world of baseball, I was the classic head case. I was a perfectionist. I constantly chased being flawless on the field, off the field, beat the shit out of myself when I fell short. On the outside, I'm sure it looked like, drive, right? This guy's motivated. He's going to make it happen. He's going to do it. On the inside, I made myself fucking, can I curse here?
Yeah, you can say whatever you
I
want.
made myself
Absolutely.
fucking miserable. And I went on, I worked my whole life to go play college baseball, and I got there and as whatever, I wanted to be a D1 guy, which I wasn't. I didn't know what D3
Me
meant.
too.
That's where I should have been. I didn't have the scholarship, and I just basically quit. I don't even know why I quit, but I quit before it all started. I quit it as a freshman before even the games begun. And I didn't have anybody to speak with. I talked to a counselor. They were useless. They didn't help me at all because they didn't understand what I felt, or at least I thought they didn't understand what I felt. That was my own narcissism. So looking back now, putting the dots together, I think that's where I ended up. Where I am now today. Why I end up where I am today is because I wanted to be that person that I didn't have, and I wish I did.
Yep. Nope. That makes a lot of sense too. And it's concise and clear. I know that was something that drove me into these things too. And even pivoting out of strength and conditioning to do what I do now. All right. Now, just again, I want to honor everything you guys do. So I want to ground kind of the concept of and the science of anti-fragility, right? The first time I heard it was Nicholas Nassim Taleb's book, which I think is so interesting because that came out. When did that come out? 2011,
2012, yeah.
2012.
Right. Now, again, this might be my naivete, and there's a question within this. But I think it's so interesting how, despite I thought that was a pretty popular book. There were a lot of people that gravitated towards it. But then ironically, from my perspective, again, we sit at this age of we're right back into optimization culture, that if people don't have all these perfect routines, holy shit, we're all going to fail. What's going to happen? If I didn't get, this breakfast in at this time and journal by this time, it seems like we create the opposite. And it's frustrating because we know that everything goes in kind of patterns and trends, but all of that notwithstanding, what do you think, like, how do you guys define anti-fragility practically, not just philosophically? Would you go there with me?
Go ahead. Start, Adam.
No, I'm going to fight with you, dude. You
okay,
are much better.
No, fight. By all means, fight.
Well, we're not part of so it's so funny because anytime we get asked this question, sometimes the tendency is to start with what anti-fragility is not.
Yes, I agree.
Right?
Yeah.
Because you hear the word and it sounds very rough. It sounds very rigid. We've had sometimes hosts, ask like, are you trauma glorifying? Yeah. It's very easy to sort of have confusion. It was not a disingenuous question. It was sort of like, what do you mean by this? And really, the simple fact of the matter, the simple conceptualization is your relationship with unpleasantness, right? Number one, is it chosen or not? Right? If it's not chosen, okay, whatever the unpleasantness is, we would argue that requires resilience, right? It's a bounce back. Resilience literally translates to jump back, right? It's reactionary in some way, shape, or form. If you don't have resilience, you're going to have fragility. You're just going to crumble, right? So you've got to have resilience. Well, what about this unpleasantness that is chosen? What about things that we're leaning into, right? What we know from Aaliyah Crum and stresses enhancing mindset, what we know about expectancy theory in general, what do we know about intentionality? It just seems to us pretty obvious that a proactive distress embracement approach, right, to unpleasantness is going to have very different outcomes and effects and processes than simply bouncing back, right? And that's what anti-fragility is how do you choose in many cases proactively to grow oneself, to develop oneself by doing things that are difficult or somewhat stressful, challenging in some way, shape, or form, but create some level of unpleasantness in the moment and then robustness right later on.
Yeah.
Oh,
No,
sure.
and go ahead, Adam.
I was gonna say, should I put it in more? I'll put it in more layman's terms, right? In the way I describe it to a lot of my athletes. It's basically, resilience helps you to survive. You get back to baseline. Anti-fragility is going to help you advance, right? That's the difference. So what do I mean by that? Anti-fragility is if you ever been to spring training, right? I'll give you an example. You ever been to spring training, and our gyms are literally a stone's throw apart, right? This is the major league side, this is the minor league side. You never step foot in the major league side unless you're invited, obviously. If they were out together on the field, you would never be able to tell the difference. And I can assure you, some of the most physically gifted people aren't the ones that end up on our side. Okay. So
Yeah.
what's the difference? And I think the difference is very clear, right? It's about their ability to adapt. It's about their ability to compete with their B or even their C game. And I think they still find a way forward. And ultimately, over time, they come out sharper and better because of it.
Yep.
Anybody at the highest level compete with their A game, right? But a lot of those guys are immensely fragile, and girls.
Yeah.
All right.
In those scenarios, right, like this coming back to anti-fragility resilience, do we want athletes or managers? Do you want your team, your employees, right? Teachers, do you want your students, whatever it might be? Do you want them to simply hope bad things happen and then get practice at it? Or should we find ways to lean into these and
Yeah.
practice them and immerse ourselves in them earlier to inoculate?
Yeah.
Right? So that when that's a high pressure moment, right? When you need a clutch state, it doesn't feel foreign. You've actually already been there because you've built this anti-fragility over time.
And you're not
No,
glamorizing suffering. Let me be clear, right? You're not this nonsense. It's like a bumper sticker. We're pretending
they
every
have to.
failure is a gift. No, it means like, hey, we're going to use difficulty as raw fuel for growth, right? And
Yeah.
we're going to practice
Yep.
that and train and put tools in a toolbox to help deal with it because it's going to come.
Yeah. No, that's helpful. All right. I'm going to give you a reaction to that and a quick conversation
Great.
point. So
Good.
just don't expect a clear question. I want you to riff off of, like, let's talk
Yeah.
about what I'm going to say next. One,
Cool.
I'm glad that you grounded that because I know throughout my career, right, you hear so many terms brought up, whether that's grit, resilience, hardiness. You mentioned unpleasantness, right? There's so many synonyms, or it depends
Mental
what the TED
toughness.
Talk is that,
Mhm.
right, mental toughness. And then they do it with different populations, with the military. And so thank you for grounding that. I think it was very clear. And if it's not, I'll push back. But you guys grounded that. And I love the
Great.
blue collar approach and the other approach. And it's not worth, I don't know what your guys' opinion is. I don't think that it's ever worth really being like, oh, well, what do you think of Duckworth's definition of this? And it's kind of like, well, let's just move things forward, right? Like, what can we agree on and move forward? Now, one area that I thought was interesting is, and this is where I want to admit my own bias, because a lot of what we do at Art of Coaching is about getting coaches and leaders to embrace and have that chosen unpleasantness, right? We put them in role-playing based workshops where they've got to learn how to deal with difficult personalities. We call it social scrimmaging. And so you mentioned a lot about athletes developing these skill sets and other individuals. I know many of you both of you work at least in corporate leadership to a degree in executive coaching. But it is interesting how few coaches, in at least my experience, want this turned on them, right? They'll talk about my athletes need to do this. This is what the general manager needs to do. And I'm like, okay, well, how about you? How about you come out for a weekend and we put you in these scenarios, and all of our workshops are open. So you might deal with an FBI agent. You might be a strength coach. And then we say, what's the scenario? Okay, you get 3 minutes, work through it. The goal is not to win. The goal is to kind of have this experiential learning with unpleasantness and manage conflict. Do you ever see that in your own practice, or just what are your thoughts or observations on patterns of coaches or leaders turning this on themselves, as opposed to just having this external focus of, no, it's just my athletes and my teams that need to develop it. And I don't care who starts, right? Just like, tell me if I'm off base. Tell me if that's not your experience. And let's have a conversation about what it takes for leaders to have that accountability.
So my initial reaction is to be somewhat segmented by population.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is when you mentioned like corporate, executive, startup, right? To kind of put it in a box, we tend to work with folks who are either kind of on threat of burnout or are looking to increase performance, right? Similar probably to you, somewhere along that spectrum.
Good to know.
Um, so often the people that are bringing us on have maybe inadvertently, because they're that type of person, that anti-fragile, take on the challenge driven person, they've put their team in that position,
Yeah.
and they've actually inadvertently created kind of an unrelenting environment, right? A kind of suck it up, let's figure it out, overcome, adapt, right, kind of environment. So in that case, I don't necessarily see it that way. I do see a little bit more with athletes, but Adam, I'd be curious to hear your response.
I think it depends. You be careful, right? Throwing all coaches in one bucket. I don't want to go there. Um, I've worked across 15 sports now. We walked through pretty much every industry. I think that we preach on, as a coach, I started as a strength coach, FYI, just to let you know, that was
Yeah.
my world, right? So we
Yep.
preach discomfort. Um, I think we avoid it because it's safer to stay in control. I think it threatens our identity when we feel like we may lose face. Um,
Yep.
I think it's very hard for people to confront their own blind spots. And I could tell you, as a therapist, I went back to do something called psychoanalytic training, where you have to put yourself into therapy for years
Sure.
on, because in most therapeutic programs, you never have to be on the couch. You can
Yeah.
always be in the position of power,
Yep.
which to me never made sense. It's like, I want to know what it feels like to give up that power and to be a patient. And I think it's hard for a lot of people because you have to admit, I don't have it all figured out.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
I mean, and this is why, and again, I'm not painting all coach, so I
You're
apologize
right.
if it came out,
Yeah.
but I was asking for patterns, right? Because I would say from our end, we see the corporate side when the loss or the cost of them not dealing with that is potentially billions of dollars, or it's in the media and it's in these things versus, and I will say that there is a tendency for us in our market to see more strength coaches avoid that because of the reasons you mentioned, self-image, face saving. It's not a community that wants to be vulnerable. What do we see in the executive side? Well, the whole lean in, Sheryl Sandberg, like now we see CEOs that want to be more vulnerable. And guess what? It also has secondary value to their organizations. But as you know, environment and kind of your social environment as well has an outsized effect on behavior. And so it's like, what kind of environmental aspects need to be around, and choose whatever where you want to take that with the environment in order to cultivate the conditions for more anti-fragility in your guys' context to take place, right? Because it's not about what's said or what's done. It's about creating an environment and the conditions for it to take place. What does that even look like? And I know you can't go into all of it. And I want to just make it easy going forward. Whenever I ask questions like that, just give one example. I'm not looking for universals. You choose, you have the power. Just, hey, if we had to go in and work on this today, here's one thing we might do with a group of individuals that need it.
Environmentally. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, I mean the it's something we think a lot about because we use some framing, you would know it as biopsychosocial. We kind of say top down, bottom up, outside in, and inside out, right? And so what you're talking about in our language is outside in. It's environmental, it's network effects, it's social emotional contagion, Pygmalion,
Yep.
like all these things that are really intimately connected to our relationship and interaction with other humans, right? So maybe the kind of most concise way we can do this is we're in the middle of a series of papers, trying to publish a series of papers on anti-fragility, and one of them we're really breaking down items and subcomponents, like how would we really measure this on a psychological level.
Yeah.
And so this is still pretty theoretical, but I think it'll help categorize. If you're thinking, how does environment influence anti-fragility? Then you kind of ask, all right, well, what do we mean by anti-fragility? We think there are kind of three subcomponents. There's distress embracement,
Yep.
right? Chosen, meaningful, with utility and purpose, not just trauma, right? And certainly not trauma for the sake of trauma, right? Something difficult that's actually growing me in some way. Okay. So that distress embracement. Then there's distress management. I've put myself in it. Can I handle it? Can I endure it? Can I navigate it? Am I building skills along the way while in it? And then there's post. Am I still thriving? Because the goal is always flourishing. The goal is always human potential, right?
Yep.
Am I still thriving? But more importantly, what benefits have I gained from it? Can I look back? Can I integrate those? Can I apply those? And so if you start with those three and say outside in influences, well, think about the way your surroundings are going to impact whether or not you view stress as a positive or negative thing.
Mm.
The way your surroundings are going to influence your goals and how hard you swing, right? And how far you're trying to hit that home run, whatever it might be. How about distress management? We all have go-to people we probably rely on to just talk through things whenever we're freaking out about something or irritated or angry or whatever it might be. That's a simple example of social support, right?
Sure.
But yeah, the idea that you're fragile or resilient or anti-fragile in a vacuum is totally unrealistic, right? It is very, very much interacting with the
Situational,
people.
contextual.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the people we surround ourselves with, 100%.
And that kind of goes back to, right, like all the old social science research where they thought, oh, is it behavioral? Is it this? No, it's interactionist. It's interactionist theory, right? And situational within that. Adam, do you have anything you want to add to that?
So I got stuck on this word vulnerable. It's a word that drives me a little crazy these days, because I think, particularly for so many leaders, I see a level of false vulnerability because they read the book, they want to lean in. It's curated,
Right.
it's transactional. In many ways, I think it's another way to create a sense of control.
Yeah. Impression management.
Yeah, it's it's validation, or you're looking for attention. It's manipulative. I'd say Machiavellian, but it's manipulative. I think real vulnerability. When I see people do exceptionally well, you're taking on some real risk, right? You're exposing yourself in such a way that could be even dangerous at times, right? It's like real vulnerability costs you something in a very
Sure.
meaningful
Skin
way.
in the game.
False, yeah, false vulnerability gain. You're looking for a gain. And understanding how these play, these power dynamics. I just had a conversation, Nick. I read the 48 Laws of Power again, and it's got me obsessed with power dynamics. But to see how this plays out, and I'm not even saying these things are necessarily conscious for leaders or coaches.
Yeah.
I think these could be unconscious motivators that are playing behind the scenes. This is why people like you are so valuable. People like what we're trying to do. This is the value we could play. The idea is how are we putting a mirror up to people that are doing this work to make them be honest with themselves so they can be better leaders across all ecosystems.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. Adam, can I ask you one question along the lines of, and Nick, feel free to jump in, right? Like this
Sure.
doesn't need to be tidy, but you mentioned Robert Greene. Robert Greene was on the podcast probably
Cool.
2 years ago. Yeah, well, big influence on my doctoral work. A lot of that is on power dynamics and how do you create facilitated outputs that help coaches how do I adapt more effectively in these social power dynamic charge environments, right? And power dynamics is tricky because relationships can't exist without them. And yet we will get coaches who say, I don't want to play the game. And I say, well, you're making the mistake of thinking you get a choice.
Exactly.
Right? Like,
that's what right.
And I wonder what your thoughts are on that. And again, that's a philosophical question that's open-ended for a reason. Okay. I'm not looking for a specific answer, but there are people out there that are in charge of creating these environments that are supposed to hopefully make athletes more anti-fragile, or those they lead. Let's just say that the target population, but that don't necessarily want to deal with the politically charged environments that are a reality of human interaction, let alone in the world of elite sport.
First of all, very cool. You got to interview Robert Greene. Very cool. Yeah. Beyond that so here's the way I put it. All right. You can't not create power dynamics. Right. The question is, are you doing it consciously or you do it by default? Are you doing it unconsciously? So the moment as a leader, as a coach, that you walk into the room, you're creating a dynamic whether you like it or not. Your tone, your timing, your posture, your language, right? It all matters. And recognize that they can be weaponized, right? Or they could be a tool to facilitate growth to the individual in front of you and the team, the culture in general. So part of that is understanding that you can't get around it. Power dynamics probably is pejorative. It's looked at pejorative. I would say relational dynamics. They're always playing out, ebbing and flowing.
Yeah, for sure. And it's an interesting, you guys talked about some level of disenchantment with education. Like in our research, they call it micro-political literacy. And you're like, Jesus, okay, what are we getting at? We're getting it. Now, I like the term literacy, right? Because it does involve, you're never going to master it. You could study power dynamics your whole life and still be subject to it because there's a contextual competence and a social agility that goes with that. And nobody's going to be able to hit that all the time. But that is part of the reality of our interactions with people. And I just think it's tough if we're trying to create anti-fragile or more adaptable, more resilient, whatever term we want to use. But I want to honor yours because I think you did a great job grounding it. If we want to ignore, you can deal with the world as you'd like it to be or deal with the world as it is.
Yes. Yeah. Nick, I'm going to one more thing, Nick, and you feel free to jump in. And I think there's a trap of, as a leader or as a coach, of rigidity. And I think what that means to me is that being adaptive to the environment, playing these games, being a little bit more flexible psychologically, feels like you're being manipulated or you're manipulating. Feel like that's not who I am. That's not how I operate. This is how I operate. These are the rules of the game. So the idea with all this is that to be psychologically flexible, right, is not simply about emotions themselves, but it's also the dynamics that are playing around you. And the best leaders, the best coaches have an essence and a sense of self, but they can adapt to the situation, knowing that the outcome is value-based, mission aligned.
Utilitarian to a degree.
Yes, exactly.
Right. Yeah. Well said. Nick, you want to add anything to that? I know we're nerding out here, but I mean, it's refreshing for me. You have to pardon my excitement. You guys talk, there's not many people that go into these things the way that you do. And so feel free to riff, or if you're like, pass, give me another question, brother.
There's this. I mean, it's definitely a riff. All that got me going to was a training I ran yesterday for one of our corporate clients and honestly, the whole training was about communication, which may seem like, a bit tangential to anti-fragility. And in some ways it was, but we spent probably the 90 minutes just going through Yale's mood meter and trying to increase emotional intelligence, because it was basically like every time you communicate, and these are people who are basically responding to queries that are irritated or angry, right? They're responding to errors. That's an emotional endeavor, right? And it's not inherently Machiavellian to stop and think, what are the emotions that are at play right now? And what do I want the emotions to be? And how do I try to help us get there in a ways that everybody feels better, which to me is utilitarian about it. To me is the win-win when it's done right and ethically, right?
Yeah, no, well said. I mean, and I would think, I hope I don't make you guys enemies out of this, but even since the terms come up a lot, I'm one of those, and I know this doesn't make me popular, that I don't think that being Machiavellian, I think that term has got misconstrued a lot, when people get into the dark triad and all that. But like Machiavelli, I think is kind of judged outside the context of his own time. Like I understand that term is often associated with deceit, and we don't need to get into semantics here. But like at its core, it's also strategic, right? Machiavelli, first and foremost, was strategic. All of his musings were how to play to a certain audience. But I think that, due to so many of his writings, being misinterpreted or not looked at the context of his time, it meant Kevin Spacey, House of Cards, playing dirty. It's like, but neither here nor there. One thing that you said that struck a chord with me that I think might be more important is, you and Dr. Wright talk about democratizing elite performance science. I would say, like, do you really think that can be done without talking about communication, as you alluded to? Because I don't see communication as tangential to that. I see that as the cornerstone of coaching and leading and even helping people cope with stress, whether that's distress, eustress, or anything that leads to, your thoughts on that? Like, why did you feel the need to, why do you think some people could think communication is tangential to that? I see it as critically important to it.
Well, sure.
I'm going to let you answer on point on that question, but just in terms of Machiavelli, I agree with you. Right. I think what he did well was he was trying to understand power as it actually is, as opposed to how we wish it would be. Yeah. So I agree with you about Machiavellian. I think it's in a lot of ways, right, in terms of what his intentions were. And I think it was focused on effectiveness, not simply just to be loved, right? Which is important in a sense. So I'll let you go with the communication thing, Nick, and then I'll chime in after.
Well, I think it's just contextual. Yes, I generally agree with you. That's going to be intimately tied to performance, although it's going to be more indirect. Yeah, I think. Right. And then you go to, well, how does that change across team sport versus individual sport versus corporate? In this particular case, it was corporate. And I think when they came in thinking about KPIs and training towards KPIs, they probably didn't necessarily have like emotional intelligent emails in mind. Yeah, right. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. And is that what you were working on?
Yeah. Yeah. Quite literally. Yeah.
I love that you brought up network effects earlier on, because that again is such a great example of the inherent complexity of that. Is you don't think an email is important or the communication or phrasing of terms, yet you see the trickle down effects of that. And I remember
Yes.
one time somebody said to me, because I was talking about communication, they go, well, this is all subjective. I go, buddy, when Ronaldo moves a Coca-Cola bottle and says agua, and Coke stock price falls that moment to the tune of $4 billion in market cap, I think that's a pretty big objective measure of the impact of communication in real time. But again, I think people think of a lot of these terms, whether it's anti-fragility or even just something like communication, it's tough for people to get their heads around sometimes because they're looking for this practical, almost prescriptive reductionist framework of how to apply that. So go.
Well, that's exactly why we brought it up, right? When we bring up, let's say, emotional intelligence, we all think of it as emotional intelligence. It's not just emotional intelligence, it's an entry point to optionality, to use Taleb's word,
I like that
right?
phrasing. Yeah.
So if you cannot identify accurately what you or another human is thinking and feeling, you just have fewer options for how to respond. It's not rocket science,
Lack
right?
of theory of mind.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Right. And so in almost every talk we give, we do this little exercise where we try to get people to name every emotion they can think of in a minute.
Yeah.
Right. The Cooper average barely hits double digits most of the time.
I believe it.
Right. And if you use, Mark's stuff out of Yale, that there's 100 of them. Like we have a 10% vocab with these things. That's low optionality. Right.
Yeah.
And it just goes back to this anti-fragility is not rigid. It's about flexibility. It's about richness. It's about range. It's about having these different options. But then to Adam's point, to your point as well, using them strategically, although I just add with Machiavelli, I actually taught world history for my bachelor's in history.
Really?
But yeah, oddly enough, yes, but I'd argue the distinction is when you're using it for a win-win.
Sure.
If you're using it for just a win, I'd make a distinction. The zero-sum game.
But isn't that the fun of teaching this stuff, right? Of you look at everything, and when we look at inherently dealing with complexity, we know that prescriptive reductionist stuff doesn't really work, and that drives some people nuts, whether you're working with first responders or corporate environments or teams, because they want a formula. And that fundamentally goes against psychological flexibility, and that fundamentally goes against anti-fragility, and that fundamentally goes against skin in the game, and then all in all goes against learning. So how do you, and again, I know this is broad, so take it where you want, but how do you get them to swallow that jagged pill, given that you are providing a service, right? And you've got to go in, I would imagine, much like I do in certain contexts, and help them understand, hey, we're going to give you strategies here. You're going to have take homes. You're going to have something that actually sticks to your ribs. But understand there's fluidity here. There's no guarantees. You're not going to win them all, and have them feel okay with that, because people want certainty in today's day and age that what you give them is going to work every damn time with any team and any organization. How do you hedge that? How do you meta communicate? How do you meet that expectation?
So we don't meet it because we don't set it.
I like the honesty. It's refreshing.
Yeah, we don't set it. I mean, the neuroscience of like emotion and, to a certain extent, the reaction is going to be set on the expectation. And we are pretty clear. Adam is crystal clear. In fact, I can almost name the Bruce Lee quote for Adam, about take what it is or what you want, discard the rest, right? We are very, very upfront in that we are going to share what we think is deep expertise in a lot of science that says there are certain things that are frequently true about a lot of people in a lot of situations. But we are not going to share anything that is 100% true for 100% people in 100% of situations. So you are going to have to, as the client, group, right, or individual, corporate, athletic, whatever, we're going to put questions and strategies in front of you that are going to increase your optionality. They're going to increase the potential timelines in front of you, but you've got to do the work to self-select and experiment, right, and try to figure out what's actually working. And so to your point about communication, that's a conversation early on the front end to make sure we're aligned and we are not over promising some sort of silver bullet, right, or fail safe or really quick solution either. Behavior change is hard. Behavior change is hard.
No question. No
I
question.
think the other approach to this is we're all trained in behavioral science here, right? And the idea is, does the average even exist in the real world?
Yeah.
Yeah,
No, it
Todd
doesn't,
Rose.
right? It's a
Right.
statistical, it's a
What a great book
convenience.
that was. Yeah.
It's not
Mm.
Yeah.
it's not a person, right? So the notion we're going to extrapolate all the data from these studies and apply it to you is bad science. It doesn't work. You're an N of one. We're going to give you evidence-based interventions and theories, but you need to experiment with it and you need to be flexible. And
Yeah.
and beyond that, I would say the other point that I think we try to do here is like we're going to go across silos. We're going to bring neuroscience to coaching. We're going to bring psychotherapy to leadership. We're going to try to bring performance psychology into the boardroom, right?
Yeah.
And
You
there
have
is no
to. That's
definitive
holistic.
science, right? But
Right.
we got to experiment and try. And that's what's exciting about this, right?
Yeah.
This is, to me, if you don't get fired up about that, then maybe you shouldn't be learning, right? There
Yeah.
are other issues to address, if you're not going
I
to be in a
think
class like that.
I agree. I mean, one thing I had to learn how to do is one of my first slides was put the formula for happiness is reality minus expectations,
Mm.
and just be like, hey, I've tried being that guy that if I have a 60-minute keynote is going to tell you everything, I end up feeling like I failed. I get on the plane, I get angry, or then like, even if it's a 2-day workshop or a 2-day in-service, there's always things that are going to be trade-offs, and that's the nature of it, and that can make it hard to democratize at times because that doesn't always put you in the zeitgeist because people still want those top 5 steps. So I was going to ask you in that process, it sounds like you guys are still actively publishing and working on how many articles will you work on or try to get published this year alone? Sorry for the
Just
naive question.
that's okay. We're not like that's a lot of R&D. It's not
Yep.
huge into the. There's a reason Adam and I didn't pursue academia after our
Yeah.
doctoral degrees, probably like you, right? But this is an area that is, even though Taleb was, coming up on 14 years ago, hasn't really done a ton of advancing in the psychological literature, right?
Yeah.
And we see huge relevance. So we're trying to push forward. Really, it'll be 2 papers, but it'll be a series of kind of 3. I wouldn't even call them studies, but we're going to try to reestablish a more robust, usable, thoughtful measure for psychological anti-fragility. That'll be a series of 3 different kind of papers within one. And then prior to that, we already have under review a scoping review for every piece of research that currently exists on anti-fragility, right? So hopefully both of those will happen this year.
Yep. No, that makes sense. That just comes from the fact of it's tough when you want to spread useful information and insight today with so many mediums, right? It's like start where your audience is. And when you do want to democratize it, well, okay, there was a time where it's best to share certain things on Instagram, now LinkedIn, now it almost feels like you got to be everywhere. And I've just wondered where in your experience you guys have kind of felt like, you know what, we really dial down here. We tend to, at least at this point in time, choose whatever point in time you want, get the most traction when speaking. What medium has that been when you try to get this in? Has it been podcasts? Has it been what is it?
Yeah. Well, so it's interesting you mentioned that. Yes, it has been podcasts, right? And a little, to a certain extent, a little bit of SEO, but really it's primarily been podcasts because I think in part, both maybe a blessing and a curse. In our little pre-interview, you said maybe we'll talk about kind of the business side of it.
Yeah.
Adam and I came together. The nice way to say it is around values, but we realized we had shared values because we were sharing an experience that did not align with our values. So we started the business, I think, with a lot of intentionality around how we wanted to do it, right? And the reason I say that is I don't necessarily suggest that to anyone trying to build like a coaching and consulting business, but we really have been, I think, rigorous about trying to stay true to ourselves,
Yeah.
not over promising, not necessarily reducing things into the top 3 or top 5. We're not perfect. We try different things. I get all of that. But we've really tried to maintain a certain level, I think, of rigor, authenticity, and honesty that seems to, for now, be translating best when we get on and just talk with colleagues and thoughtful people like you, or on LinkedIn where there's a more professional setting, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
We've yet
No.
to crack the code, like most people, how to use social, how to use AI, how to use different tools to really democratize this, not just so that it's accessible, because I think it's accessible for a lot of people,
Yeah.
Is it engaging in a way that leads to high efficacy change and growth, right?
Yep.
I don't think we've cracked that code yet.
And so Nick has brought me into this century. At what, like I'm way older than you guys. I've been doing this for a long time. I've been self-employed. I've been in
He
consulting since I
downplays
was.
himself a lot. He
But
leans into this blue collar thing.
no, but I've been doing this some level of performance, whether physical or mental or therapeutic, whatever, for over 25 years, right?
Sure.
And he just brought me this. I never had a website. I never advertised. I never had I've never done anything. 20 years, right? To me, my business is built upon relationships. That was it. That was it. I had a phone number, and people would call me, and I had
Yep.
a full book for 25 years.
Yep.
So this is a new world because we're trying to scale this and democratize it in a way that I would never be able to do, obviously, in my little world. However, I created a pretty nice lifestyle for myself for 25 years in professional sport at the biggest companies, some names that you would recognize in Hollywood. It's been great, and I've never felt like I had to compromise myself in any way, shape, or form. Probably my own detriment. I probably could have leveraged those relationships in a way that would have expanded things, but that wasn't what I wanted. I wanted to do meaningful work and create a lifestyle where I was home for my child. You know, I wanted to be a coach. I wanted to be involved. I was a professor for 10 years, but I never advertised a bit. It was
Yep.
just creating relationships where people believed in me, and I didn't ask anything other than for them to pay my invoice, and I
Yeah.
provided a
Which
service.
is fair. I mean, you should. Yeah, I mean, that's a whole nother topic that maybe we'll get into in part 2. But it's interesting because we also have. Well, I won't go down that rabbit hole. Nick, you were about to say something. You go ahead. I want to honor your time.
No, it's all good. Yeah, continue,
No.
please.
What'd you have to say? You were going to jump in there when he was talking about his book and creating a lifestyle, and he kept it old school with relationships.
No, I say it's worth everything we're saying here is true, and it's worth noting contextually. Adam and I are both on the other side of 40. We're
Yeah.
at different life stages where we have flexibility to build business in a different way, right?
Yeah.
And Adam wasn't when he started, right? But point being is there are different pressures based on life context and life experience and goals, and we fortunately are in similar positions and have similar value sets that we're pretty aligned on how we want to go about it.
I'll say this though, the gold in what you both said, knowing my audience well, is you told them exactly what they needed to hear in a non-superficial way, meaning that you do have to have a blend. So, when I first started building a brand, and I think your brand is just who you really are, made real by what you do, right? Like that was a time where social media did have some real big traction. But, that was Strength Coach Brett that built that following. When I started doing more leadership development, coach development, social psychology, now some of that traction falls off. But then as I cross over into the business realm and first responder, then you get a different audience. So there's churn. So what I learned is there were certain things I couldn't rely on social media to get traction or help democratize information which you led to, right? You do today, in today's world, you do have to have some kind of website or internet presence. That's your online real estate, right? You meet somebody, they want to learn about what you do. It helps to have but at the same time, Adam, like when that stuff slowed down, what I always told our staff or our contractors is, guys, quit posting stuff on social media all the time. Go talk to people, open your phone book, even when it would be to come to our workshops. I'm like, you can post all day about a workshop, getting on the phone and saying, hey, I'm going to be in Tennessee in November. Do you know anybody that has an interest in social psychology and leadership? So those things are both important. So you gave the listeners a lot of value saying, if you would have just said just YouTube and double down on paid ads, that's not feasible for people in, different parts of their career, let alone socioeconomic status, right? Because now it's like, oh, I've got to be a content creator instead of somebody actually doing the job. That becomes tricky. So I appreciate that. Flipping back to just going back to being able to build Anti-Fragility. And you can choose to answer this in accordance to giving examples of things you do with yourself, because our audience will value that. We have people that are going through all kinds of stuff that are like, help me, or things that, you recommend towards working with kids, regardless of the gender or whatever. But if somebody listening wants to become more anti-fragile today, I'm not going to ask the top 2, just what are 1 to 2 practices you recommend that they could implement immediately? In any context, feel free. I know that's a broad question, but we also live in a society where somebody's like, man, give me the need to know for the now, and they want it stripped away a little bit. Just give them something.
Yeah. Well, there's kind of two questions there. What do we do? What could you do?
I'm saying you
Mine's
could
not.
take it anywhere. Yeah.
Yeah, and mine's not practical in any way, shape, or form. But my wife and I are pretty nomadic. We're on the move frequently, and part of that is an intentional endeavor in anti-fragility. It's constantly adapting. It's constantly getting used to and learning new spaces. It's constantly perspectives shifting and enriching. There are trade offs with it around kind of family, community, friends, those sorts of things. So it's not a recommendation, right? But it is an intentional activity. It gets paired with meaningful experiences like national parks, challenging hikes, physical exhaustion, those sorts of things as well,
So
right?
do you mean you don't have a home? You're moving, you're literally moving constantly? Is that what you mean?
We're somewhat seasonal in a couple places, but we're doing a lot of moving in between.
Got
Yep.
it.
Yeah,
Got it.
doing a lot of moving in between. So it's a lot of going back to psychological richness, that novelty and context shifting, and just, there's a lot of partnership, figuring it out along the way and solving problems and dealing with the chaos of that, right? But it illustrates, I think, the more kind of refined sciencey answer, which is when we're doing the scoping review, I think you can kind of deduce three or four different considerations for when you're trying to help yourself or anyone. Number one would be, what is that person's subjective experience of a stressor they're taking on or you're going to introduce? You can't just look at the stressor. You have to look at the match between the stressor and the individual, right? What's their baseline level of
Yep.
ability to handle that stress? We always use the example. We have a colleague and a board member, a tremendous coach herself, Dr. Karen Dark, who was paralyzed from the chest down at age 23, PhD
Wow.
geologist, right? She has since sea kayaked from Vancouver to Alaska. She's won a gold and silver medal in the Paralympics for handbike. She's taken that handbike up to base camp of the Himalayas of Mount Everest. In fact, I believe it was Adam,
You
right?
want to feel completely incompetent and a
Yeah.
slug? Talk to her for five
Yeah.
minutes. It's ridiculous.
Right.
She forgot to mention her two medals from the Olympics. She didn't even talk about those. I'm like, wait a second. Yeah.
That no, not everyone is handling the thing she took on the same way. She
Sure.
had built that up, right? And sort of inoculated her
Some
subjective
tolerance.
experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, her tolerance, right? So number two then is dose. Even if the kid or the employee or the athlete can handle this stressor, how much of it, how frequently, how intensely can
Yep.
they handle it? And number three, don't throw them into the pool without knowing how to tread water
Right.
or backstroke or front stroke. Make sure they have some strategies so that it's a facilitative environment. It's challenging and it's stressful, but there are support mechanisms in place to scaffold success.
Facilitated hormesis, right? Little doses of
100%,
toxic.
100%.
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
So, look, by the way, I hate doing this, right? Because I don't like, for all the subjective elements. So, for example, I have a client that came into Tuesdays are my clinical days. I just see clinical patients that all have a diagnosis. And for me to say, put yourself in a situation where you don't control the outcome, where you may fail, but you're going to put yourself. For him, that might be getting up and making his bed.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, as far as he can go, and absolutely overwhelming, literally.
Yeah. But a massive step if he does it.
Massive win, massive win, right? And he'll
get into the shower next. Yeah,
absolutely, right.
Shout out, what about Bob? Baby steps.
Exactly, right. But for a leader, that might be putting yourself in front of the boardroom and challenging. Let them challenge one of your decisions in front of the entire group without knowing what's coming, where you're completely out of control. You have to be agile. You have to respond, and you could lose face or worse.
Yeah.
Right. So it depends on where they are, what they have to lose. That idea, just like exercise, fit, frequency, intensity, time, and type, really can apply here. And I think that speaks to us as coaches too, where it's like we have these ideas of sessions and we have these ideas of trainings, but it's like you need to know the person in front of you to know if it's going to stick and the way we want, if it's going to hit them the way we want to hit them. And I think we're often blind to the individual, their ego strengths, their ego weaknesses, their ambitions, their needs. I can't help my trainings. I look at the kid in front of everybody, no matter what their position is. Everybody has a need to be met. You got to figure it out. They might not even know.
Yeah. No,
right?
and I want to be mindful of your time. I want to respond to this, but do you guys have to go right now? I know we had some technical things on the front end. Do you have 15 more
I'm
minutes or
okay.
so? Okay, you let me know.
Good to 4:30.
Well, and the thing, like, see the person in front of you. I think this is why you touch on a point, both of you. You can't do that if you don't reflect on yourself when you're in the shit. And what I mean by, and this is why, again, if we go towards creating better coaches, I mean, there was a period where, all right, I teach adaptive strategic communication and conflict resolution skills. Well, I went through a divorce, and I remember sitting there thinking, oh my God, now who's going to come to me to work on their communication and conflict resolution? I remember my lawyer at the time goes, buddy, he goes, do you think that every marriage counselor in this has, or one
Perfect
person said to
marriage.
me, and then a perfect example of the internet being the internet. Somebody one time was like, well, why should somebody listen to you as opposed to like Chris Voss from Never Split the Difference? I go, well, do you know he's divorced? But I just remember when I was going through that, there was a day where I looked up at my ceiling and I'm like, okay, there is a lot to manage. I'm going through a divorce. I'm running a business. And I'm like, this is what a lot of your clients go through. Kids or not kids or what have you. It's the tyranny of the now. And I start thinking, well, I have all these workshops I have to sell out. I have to do the podcast and Mighty Networks. I have to be dad of the year to my kid. And I've got to manage this and manage my lawyer. And I'm just like, almost kind of like that, get out of bed. I'm like, just do the next right thing. Do the next right thing, build into that and lean into this. And then I had people say, well, are you ever going to talk about that? And I go, absolutely. Why would I not? And this isn't about faux vulnerability. This is just about like the self-awareness of the shit. And then recognizing that somebody else has some different version of it. And going back to you, Nick, real quick, like somebody doesn't have to move all the time or have the affordance or the ability or the privilege to do that. What that represents is you change your environment and you change it frequently. Right. And so somebody can switch shit around in their room. They could drive a different car that day. They could change something that brings in some brings some level of hardship or nuance or just anything that kind of brings an alteration into the day or the fabric, right? Am I hearing you right?
100%. It's I mentioned my dissertation was on eudaimonia, and I use some of Carol Riff's stuff on psychological well-being. So the idea of like environmental mastery, part of what helps well-being or psychological well-being is I can handle my environment. My environment's predictable. I know how to navigate it. We're intentionally shaking that up.
Yeah.
Right. And to Adam's point, you can shake that up in a lot of different ways. We happen to come from a place that let's say, lacks kind of the enrichment that we crave. And so we move around and change environments to get that enrichment, right, in perspective in a variety of ways. To Adam's point, it doesn't have to be that way. I have close friends, family, whatever it might be, where changing the environment for them is choosing a different restaurant from what they usually go to every Friday.
Yeah.
Like, cool, no judgment. It's all about circumstances, values, preferences, alignment with sort of your version of the good life, right?
Yeah. Would you say that's part of like what can help democratize this is on one end, it's like we don't need people out there just doing, oh, I'm going to hike Kilimanjaro because that shit sounds, you don't need that. But at the same time, you don't want the person that just thinks, well, I'm going to use different headphones today. I've checked my little anti-fragile box, but it's this middle ground of letting them, hey guys, it's kind of finding this Goldilocks thing, and that's going to mean different things to you folks, but you don't need to go sign up for an ultra because you realize that you're unhappy with your life. But at the same time, let's not pretend that wearing a different colored shoes is your big challenge for the day, right? It's giving that level of accessibility and helping them find what that means to them. Am I understanding that right?
I think so. Yeah.
I think there's an existential quality in terms of what you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
And the part of this is dealing with the freedom of choice, understanding yourself. I think there's a level of radical awareness. I'm reading a book by Anthony DeMillo. I don't know if you ever saw his book called Awareness. He was a Jesuit priest, died about 40 years ago. He's been dead but he was Indian. He lived in India. He was a psychotherapist, and he also married this all within the Catholic faith, so to speak, as a Jesuit. And a lot of it, as he discusses, about waking up. It's about spiritual awareness, being aware of yourself, being aware of around your surroundings, being aware of the sense of transcendence, moving beyond your narcissism, getting back to where you talked. The notion that any healer who's worth a dime, right, whatever that they haven't suffered is nonsense. This is where empathy comes from. This is where insight comes from. This is where compassion comes from. For me, it's where credibility comes from. I
Yeah.
don't want a psychotherapist who's 25 years old that just graduated college and grew up in a perfect, upper middle class life. I want an 85-year-old guy who's gone through the ringer, right? Wrinkles on his face, multiple, like I want someone who's experienced it, not someone who just read it in a book, but can have
Yeah.
some distance so they can create an environment and a space for me to explore my shit. Right.
Yeah.
And I
I'm
think,
glad you brought that up as the acid. Oh, sorry. I didn't mean to talk
go
over
ahead.
you.
No,
I was just gonna say I'm glad you brought that up as an acid test to a degree of credibility in today's day and age, because you do sit on this edge of, like, for some people it's referent power and likability or what have you. To some people it's expert power. No, I have all these credentials. It's like, well, yeah, I mean, you need to know your shit, but you have to have gone through the ringer. You know
yeah.
what I mean? And I think that's what everybody's kind of missing today in the world of content creators who just know how to hack an algorithm. Is, sure, they might be bringing a lot of information to us, but there's a difference between information and wisdom, and some of those things have to be really, like, wisdom has to be hard fought and won, engraved. Or in Nick's case, don't think I didn't notice those tattoos. Those are amazing. That's another, we got to talk about that on a podcast because I'm looking to get my first one, but it's got to be tattooed in there. And that doesn't happen through kind of this faux, non-facilitated, you can't be a tourist, you know?
In the world where we are right now with AI, right? Content is no longer an issue. It's ubiquitous, right? You have
Great
access to
point.
everything. Everything's ever be thought. So what we're bringing to the table is our experience of it and our ability to communicate it effectively. And a lot of that is about our lived experience, right? So we are the vessel more so than the actual content itself. And part of that is living it, not just talking about it.
Yeah. No, I agree. I have two more questions for you, so that gives you an idea of time. One, let's say somebody's listening to this and they're like, oh my God, I got to see more of what these guys have to offer, whether I bring them in for an in-service or I contract them individually, what have you. What does that look like? Because this is something that I found to be more and more important in today's world is people, especially if they're going to invest their time and their money, it's not enough just to see like an agenda of the day, or like, what does it actually look like in one context working with you if I reached out today? Any example you want.
It's got to start with just a simple discovery call, a Zoom meeting with one or both of us, because as you heard earlier, we're kind of checking in and interviewing you maybe as much as you're interviewing us, because we want to make sure we're the right fit.
Yeah.
A lot of this for us is efficacy and impact. Obviously, everyone has to make a living, those sorts of things, but we just really aren't probably going to engage if it's not the right sort of values alignment, messaging fit. That said, we're pretty flexible in how we try to help and support and accommodate. And that's everything from, like you said, keynote talks, big conference talks, to single or multi-day workshops, to one-on-one coaching, to two-on-one coaching,
Yeah.
right? Where you actually work with both Adam and I, sometimes simultaneously, sometimes separately. But going forward more and more to kind of try to scale the impact piece, we'll start to develop a much more robust, and probably in the next 3 to 6 months, train the trainer program where we can share more of the science. We can share more of the details. We can get the tools and the measures out there in front of practitioners
Yeah.
more frequently so that they can go kind of spread this more effectively.
Yep. Makes sense. Really. Adam, is there anything you wanted to add there?
No.
Okay. And then the other question, and I don't know, somebody asked me this one time a long time ago. It's meant to be a thoughtful question, but I understand that it can feel like, oh man, where do I start? But again, this goes against the whole idea is I want you to feel like, and I want anybody to feel like, man, I really got to talk about something that what is a question you wish you got asked more? And just people don't do it. You know, this could be something you just want to read, and it can be about anti-fragility. It can be about any kind, like anything, the education system. It can be going out on your own, anything that you, but Adam, I'm going to start with you. What is something you wish you got asked more, either in these kinds of podcasts or in anything that you just feel like you don't get a touch on as much as you would like? That's important to you.
Mm. And I've never had somebody ask that question, so I think you just did it.
But
um,
think about it, right? Because there's some things that we talk about, even just you and I, and when we're connecting here of, well, it frustrates me when people do this, or one thing that, we know that there's certain things that it can be, we're always grateful for certain questions, but there are certain things that get brought up time and time again. And you might think off camera, like, people are missing the point. They're not asking the real question. What is a real question people should be asking? And they're not. It's
I
also
think
okay to
the
say, I don't know.
No, I think the question that comes up in my mind in dealing with high level performers across every industry is, um, everybody wants to know how they did it, and I think people never ask what price they pay for chasing
Excellent.
excellence, because there's a price,
This is where
and
the interviewer and me wants to ask you what price you paid, but we'll have to do that
you just
part
asked the
two.
question, right? There's always going to be sacrifice, and we talk a lot about work-life balance, how it's bullshit. It's about integration and understanding if you're moving with intention, and guided by your values. That there's going to be times when you're out of balance, but you're
Yeah.
integrated and you're whole. And
Yep.
yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah, we'll have to connect offline about this because I mean, I don't know. Well, Nick, let me give you a chance to answer this before I go because I never shut up and you guys intrigue me to no end. But what would be your answer to that?
I was leaning towards the I don't know. But, as Adam was kind of giving his answer, it left me thinking like I'm not in it for excellence. I'm in it for excellent lives. And if that means to that person and that client being excellent, and to Adam's point, sacrificing or integrating, right, or synergizing in a way that comes with a lot of like unpleasantness so that they can win the
Yeah.
Phelps and the Jordans and the Serenas and whoever else, right? Cool. But I'm after flourishing and potential and like how that person feels and impacts the world. And I think Adam is too fundamentally. And so a lot of times anti-fragility gets asked about from the performance lens, right? And sometimes just from the mental health lens. And I think for us, we always want to get across, we think it's an important capacity for all of the above,
Yeah.
right? And it's serving something bigger than what often are sort of like these hard quantifiable Western performance-based metrics. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. It's all kind of goes into it in a way. The idea of just the hero trope when you look at
Mhm.
Western performance
Yeah.
metrics, right? We love these redemptive arcs and these ideas that here's what you got to hit and goes into Joseph Campbell and some things.
Mhm.
It's interesting how a lot of that influences,
Mhm.
the
Very
science of
individualist. Yeah.
yeah. Well, I
Yep.
want to say this. You mentioned what you're after with these conversations. What I'm after is actual real conversations, which I'm so grateful you guys brought to this. I know that there's a million. I mean, I have a Google Doc of 32 questions I could have asked, whether it's about flourishing, distilling different principles you guys have talked to, experience with high school athletes, what have you. So I apologize if you were really wanting, but I know
No,
that
it's
our
great.
audience, and you mentioned it, Adam, it like information just to a degree is not hard anymore. Finding real conversations with people that don't bullshit is very important, and I think is going to be critical currency going forward. And I think you guys might even be number 400 on the podcast. I've done a lot of these, and there are times where I thought about not doing guest episodes anymore because you just never know if you're going to get people that cut
Yeah.
the shit and are real. So
Yep.
I want to say thank you. I could genuinely have talked to you for about 2 more hours. If we
Same
don't
here.
find a way to do business together, at least keep in touch in the future,
Mhm.
we're all idiots.
Mhm.
But let me leave it with this after all those compliments. If we want to promote your work, people out there want to support it, where is a place they can go right now after listening to help you guys? And don't give me the I don't want to be self-promoting bullshit. Where can we go to help? We want to help.
Everything's on the website right now, and it's just easy. We often just go by the shorthand TAA, but it's just the antifragileacademy.com. And
Easy.
anti-fragile is one word, no hyphen. You'll see the different services, you'll see the different options. You can book a discovery call there, but we have a ton of zero cost resources to just get you started or get you further down the road with podcasts or talks or books, little self-assessments, whatever it might be. So that's a great place to get going, and you can contact us and communicate with us really easily from there.
And
Perfect.
and FYI, our entire curriculum that we've run at D1 programs is available for free on our YouTube channel. It's
Folks,
it's all it's all accessible to anybody who wants it.
listen to what they just said, right? Don't talk about other people investing in you if you're not doing the work yourself. You know how big we push accountability at Art of Coaching. So go there, go to those resources, make the most of them, give a review to their work, right? These are things that we need spread. We don't need more idealistic bullshit out in the world. We need more stuff that actually hits home and has ripple effects to the individual and beyond. And this is it. Nick, Adam, I appreciate you again. Thank you so much for coming on and looking forward to talking more in the future.
Same here,
Thanks
Brett.
for having us.
Thank you.